So I'm really thrilled to introduce an old friend, Colonel Tom Clancy, who is an engineer with the MITRE Corporation. I first got to know Tom when he was working for the DoD CIO as their ICAM lead for all things identity, credential, and access management. Has definitely been, I would say, not just during his time in the Defense Department, but in the U.S. government, one of the more forward-thinking people when it comes to looking at not just how do we use FIDO, but how do we use other new standards and new technologies to better secure our enterprises and also support the mission. So really thrilled to have Tom come up today to talk about improving authentication policy enforcement for government resources. And again, if you have questions, please submit them through the app, and if we have some time, I'll try to ask them. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeremy. And thanks so much for everybody who's here to listen to my talk. I'm excited to share some insights. How's everybody doing with this conference? Is everybody having a good time? Is everybody learning something? There's lots of takeaways. I was glad that there was some resonance from some other speakers that I wasn't going to completely spin some myths and fables. So I hope this is useful to you. I don't have an authoritative voice in the conversation, but I'm an observer of a lot of different elements. So I just wanted to kind of zoom out a little bit and see if I can offer some insights. He's going to give me the clicker. I haven't done this in a while. I'm a little rusty. Thank you. So why talk about this? Well, you know, it's all about the policies, right? Where we need to enforce policies. They're not good enough to be in paper. We're expecting more, and we're piling on additional policy load for enterprises to enforce with our zero trust approach. And I think that we're also at a crux with the way that we do compliance and in the risk management framework. And there's a lot of things that are helping system development lifecycle and DevSecOps and things just go faster. And so what I'd like to talk about today is kind of a theme that we've talked about: people, where we want to make things faster and more convenient, easier, and more secure. I think we need to use that lens when we talk to relying parties or applications. And part of that journey is in government. We're clearly moving away from direct authentication using PKI only, and everything else is an exception, to one that embraces complementary technologies that offer the requisite assurance levels, all permissive, right? This is all permissive policy, so that we can have a more consistent user experience using things like single sign-on and identity providers. And our focus on authentication may have excluded some important elements of that architecture from the way that we think about risk and the way that we think about systems development. So I'm going to try and dive into that a little bit and offer some thoughts on that. So here's kind of the broad brush, right? We always have requirements. They're usually in PDF form or on websites, right? We have English paragraphs that then turn into technical implementation that carries all of that weight. And we use our technical implementation successfully or unsuccessfully to demonstrate that we've done all of those other processes. So this is, I think that there's a certain amount of theater involved in that if we haven't really assembled, disassembled, and really asked a lot of that last tactical mile, let's say, of our implementation. And that comes down to the protocol level, not only from an interoperability perspective, because we are using IDPs, we're using multilateral federation to work with partners, and these are important aspects of that. So we need the security and the interoperability at the protocol level, and some of those policies that are in those documents, they need to be better reflected in the way that we share information at the protocol level semantically. So we'll kind of drill through that very quickly here. So requirements, there's their litany, right? There's always one more requirement. I've been doing this for a long time, and people will point out a memo that I'd never seen before, and I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. I didn't know that that had been published. That's useful, but it also makes things a little bit more complex. So fair credit to NIST for the 863 digital identity guidelines, the way that it was refactored in 2017 and has continued to evolve. That's going to carry a lot of our weight in terms of how we do policy and demonstrate that. I want to point out FISMA because FISMA is the law. That's why all this stuff has to get done eventually. And FISMA is also has a reporting mechanism where there are metrics that we need to demonstrate so that we can show progress. So when systems are in this pipeline to end up on the network and successfully prove that they've done all those things that they need to, there are a lot of factors that are involved. And organizations have a great deal of control over some of them. But where they don't have a lot of control are really the dynamics of that specific mission context where you have people doing crazy things in clean rooms or some sort of a lab or in space or, there's any number of complications for someone who's using a desktop where they slide in a smart card and everything works, right? We've got to be more embracive. We've got to embrace those challenges. And I want to point this out as well. Vendor implementations are a lot of the reason why exceptions are required. And there's a lot of utility and a lot of good value to be had from vendor support for these cases in a more complete way. So I talked a little bit about how things are moving faster, and I'll jump down to the bottom. The Open Security Controls Assessment Language. This is another great NIST product that allows you to use JSON to describe your policies, and then more quickly pivot around and demonstrate your compliance with different regimes. They're using that for FedRAMP. There's a work afoot to make the ATO process by which you get stuff on the network more rapid and get reciprocity and reuse, and all of those things are fantastic. What we could do as a community is hook onto that to drag improving authentication and access management enforcement, carefully connected to those, so we can use their drag to get out of gravity's pull, let's say. So this is really modernizing that system development lifecycle. And the earlier we go in the process where those documents are turning into ideas and requirements for systems, the better off we are. And the waterfall is not the best way to do systems development, and government is in the process of kind of pivoting and embracing a more dynamic, DevSecOps type approach. And all of those impulses, point to how do we make it faster and easier, not just for the user, but for those system designers and developers. What we don't want them to do is we don't want them to write their own JOT libraries, right? so let's not rush to failure. Let's try and be more deliberate about what we want them to do, and I think that points to how we deliver the services. So where's the connective tissue? So the connective tissue is 863. The controls that the risk management framework and the cybersecurity framework are trying to achieve in a specific system or a specific transaction or a specific application, right? Those connect to the assurance levels in the NIST framework. So let's call that for what it is and move on. In 63-4 in the draft, they've really expanded this idea of tailoring. So this slide is all about how I stopped hating AAL2. I heard the discussion before, right? It's an important question. Why in the world would we have such terrible multi-factor authentication options available in AAL2? Well, here's the bottom line. You don't have to use it, right? It's not a requirement to support one-time OTP for system access at AAL2. You need to do the tailoring, and that's where the threat comes in, right? That's a really important element to this, is that the agencies aren't being driven to do bad business. The system designers aren't required to support things that don't make sense from a risk framework. But also, you've got to be available, and that brings in all those mission crazy cases where we have sort of a expanded ecosystem of authentication options and a permissive environment for using them. That's goodness. Let's figure out how to harness that safely. So you don't just do tailored AAL. And these days, because of that service model, we really need to consider tailoring FAL, the Federation Assurance Level, in connection with the way that we do AAL. So we'll build that wristwatch a little bit more. So this is a work in progress. This diagram. I don't know if this is effective. This is several iterations after it started, but the basic idea is that AAL 63 gives you your basement, right? It gives you the bottom line sort of coarse-grained baseline AAL, IAL, and FAL. And then you use tailoring based on your threat and your mission assurance requirements and availability concerns to figure out what you're going to do, hopefully, well north of that, right? There's going to be some cases where passwords are an important part of the ecosystem, and it's going to be a long tail to move forward of that. So I think we've got to give ourselves some grace and understand that we're going to have sort of an ecosystem that's a little bit jumbly, and that's okay. Temporary and permanent exceptions to using multi-factor authentication are something that we hear about all the time. What I tried to do here is show that over the base AAL, if you use the 800-171 controls, which are supposed to be for the defense industrial base and are used much more broadly than that, the requirement is replay resistant MFA. But if you look at OMB memo M2209, basically the cybersecurity, the zero trust strategy, it emphatically says phishing resistance for all enterprise uses. It doesn't specify an AAL, but it specifies phishing resistance. So those are essentially tailoring that's not optional, right? That's tailoring that's been done for you. And the question is, what are the different authentication methods that fit into those categories that are useful for those purposes? Whether you're protecting CUI using the 171 controls, or you're using phishing resistance to support enterprise use cases, and then of course, if all of the tailoring options have been completely exhausted, then you're probably in the PIV environment. Now, PIV isn't intended to be an access policy. And I think that's something that we've been trying to back out of across government for a long time, is that PIV is kind of the default. It's the principal authenticator. So people use that as a baseline policy. And of course, that drives you to something that is terrible. It's an exception-based management of alternate credentials. So people have to go, well, I can't use PIV here, so I end up putting in an exception. You get a username password exception, and you just discarded a whole bunch of really good authentication methods to describe your access policy. So we want to stop that, right? We want to start at the baseline, tailor up, leave all the options on the table that are appropriate for a specific purpose, without starting at the top and saying how low can you go. So this is the idea of there's less optionality or more permissiveness. So, but this is kind of complicated, right? This isn't I just pass an AAL to my subscribers and or my relying parties and they're happy, because they have all these complicated policies that they need to enforce. So part of that discussion is also, well, what's going on in FAL, right? As we get more and more successful with defeating phishing, the adversary is not going to say, oh, well, I guess we're done, we'll just go out of business. They're going to look for the next place to exploit the authentication and access management stack. And they're probably going to find some low-hanging fruit in the way that we do federation profiles, or federation protocols poorly. I think that's already started. We've started to see a family of MFA bypass attacks, although that's a term that I think we need to continue to refine, because it's more than just exploiting specific authenticator mechanisms. It's the stuff that's around the authenticator. So you're really bypassing it. But that's a story for a different night, maybe next year. But here we have a requirement to really get after what are those assurance promises, what are we going to tailor, and then how do we make that something that we can scale out for all our systems and relying parties. Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to do this sort of implied or static built-in assurance level with an identity provider, right? If we're setting up a new identity provider for every type of authenticator or every policy combination, we're going to run out of money before we've actually had any sort of effect on the security value at the relying parties. So we need a complex support system for federated authentication, and we certainly need to include in the way that we operate our protocols those great extensions. The standards community within OpenID Connect and Open Authorization 2.0, the extensions are magical. They've done some real great work in terms of the demonstration of proof of possession. There's the mutual TLS extension that really supports better authentication of clients, as well as sender constraining tokens. I mean, there's great stuff out there, and we need a demand signal for government agencies to leverage them. But it's not something that fits in one of those pieces of paper that gets cut out of OMB, right? We're going to need to figure out how to make this sausage and make it work faster, kind of at the grassroots level, I would suggest, and really hand those developers at a place in the pile where they can make sense of it, what their target is, so they can be interoperable. They can fully get the security value of that service that they're going to use. So here's where the IAM vendors come in, and Grant and the ESF has targeted this issue within their recommendations to vendors and developers. There's kind of a spectrum of ways that an IAM vendor can support protocols with enhancements, right? You can either make it configurable, or you can make it a default, or you can do something in between. And here's what I think that makes. Love to get more feedback on this presentation of this. If there's a better way, I think this is an important argument to have. If it's configurable, it's basically daring you to implement a fully realized sort of tailored protocol using their product. There might be hidden menus, there might be configuration files that are actually in the software itself, there may be radio buttons, but you have to basically figure out how to get it to do what you want to. The opposite side of the spectrum is when you install this, those are the defaults, and that's pretty heavy-handed. So in between, this interoperability of a tailored federation protocol is kind of an area where there's opportunity, right? And the vendors can really help us. And a lot of some of the strategies that we talked about, queuing and nudging users to get onto better authentication, they apply when you're trying to configure systems onboarding. Why in the world would you let somebody just go down the SAML path without considering using a modern federation protocol? That's an easy nudge, right? Let's hide SAML in the configuration settings as an example. So here are some of those options. Let's not hide the best choices. Let's see if there's ways that we can mutually discover things that those relying parties can support. Let's make the bad choices harder to find and make sure that there's warnings. Are you sure you want to do this? Are you sure you want to you want to skip the sender constraining of tokens? And at the end of the day, this is a client code problem, right? If we want vendors and developers to onboard these capabilities, we're really going to need to make it easy for them in the libraries they use, whether it's a part of a program or if it's a part of some arrangement for support and systems development, that those libraries are represented so they don't have to try and overthink it, or it's easier to do it and include it than not. So here's where we kind of talked about tailoring the protocols, and there are a number of Federation profiles for OpenID Connect in particular that are available for use and have been improving and are in some cases they're getting ready to improve again. So I'd cue your attention to some of those. But there's also a need for semantic profiles. So we talked about those policies that we have to sort of make a part of that dialogue between a relying party and an IDP, an identity provider. They need to be able to request a specific type of authentication for a specific purpose. And that has to be adequately implemented, and then they need a return that says that they were able to do it. And then we can start that cycle of, well, I asked them for a PIV, and they had another phishing-resistant authentication, but it was at AAL2. You know, is that good enough? You know, we can help the mission and support the user in a way that the system captures and fully makes a part of that interoperability in that experience without giving away the farm. Here I'd point out, you know, AAL2 is kind of like was pointed out before, everything is in there. So what are the dimensions of those different solutions that we want to call out and make available as policy factors in authorization, right? The strength of authentication is an authorization attribute of that session. It's not really a part of the identity. And PIVness, in a lot of different conversations, we've been struggling to identify, well, what is a PIV minus IAL3, AAL3? Well, that's the delta there is PIVness, right? It's all that other important stuff. It's very valuable, and relying parties should know if it's available or if it's important to them that they can ask for it. So here is an example of a login.gov has embraced ACR, authentication context class references, as a means for relying parties to ask for a specific type of authentication, or in the access tokens that come back, you know, receiving information about what authentication was presented. This is a very easy, it's a string, and all you need to do is support the handling of those strings. If you get more complicated than something like this, it gets bad, it gets old fast. You really need to look at vectors of trust, which we need better implementation of across the board. And then within OpenID Connect, there's also the authentication method references. On this chart, the two left columns there are sort of the ones that are already in the RFC 8176, the IANA tables for authentication method references. Well, there's a lot of interest in expanding that. And I think there's a lot of utility if we can get a group together to kind of agree on what's going to be most beneficial. That would really be low-hanging fruit. But we're going to need the vendor support for those. So we kind of talked about OSCAL as kind of the control acceleration piece. We connected it to the way that it fits with 863. Within the Federation profiles, you know, the need for a semantic element so that you can convey policies and requests and responses. So what are we, where are we, what can we do? Well, we need to kind of figure out how to elevate those conversations and adopt them, advocate for them. how do we poke vendors in the eye saying, hey, this stuff is kind of important. This is kind of the way we're going to be doing things under a zero trust framework for the foreseeable future. So what can we do now, and how do we partner up on that? And I love the fact that once we start talking about authentication strength and access management in federal government, we've opened up the conversation about context-based access control and authorization just a little bit wider as a part of supporting the strong authentication solution. So with that, I appreciate it. I apologize for rushing at the end, but thanks very much for your attention. I'd love to take questions, and if we exhaust that, I'll go out there, and I'd love to talk about more of this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Yeah, we're just about out of time. If you have any questions, it's supposed to be like a speaker corner outside that you can go and chat with Tom and ask him any follow-up questions.